Before we jump in, I want to let you know that it is summer membership drive time here at Convergence. It takes a lot of people power to put this show out week after week, and if what we do matters to you, consider becoming a member. You can go to bit.ly/2026 member drive, all one word, and sign up. We're looking for 250 people to join us this summer, which will double the number of folks in our membership program. This year, we are rolling out some really exciting new perks for our members, including our just announced training with Riddhi Singh on surround sound communications, which is coming up on July 29th. Regular listeners will remember Riddhi from our episode about the Freeze the Rent campaign, and you'll be able to learn directly from Riddhi about how she built a narrative machine and how you can apply those lessons to your organizing too. Only members get access to this training, so go to bit.ly/2026 member drive and set up your membership today. We'll have links to the drive in the show notes. Welcome to Block and Build, a podcast from Convergence Magazine. I'm your host and the publisher of Convergence, Caden Mock. On this show, we're building a roadmap for the movement that's working to block the impacts of rising authoritarianism while building the strength and resilience of the broad front that we need to win. This week on the show, we examine the FBI's raid of the Ohio Organizing Collaborative, which occurred on June 11th, with former staff member and Ohio organizer Caitlin Johnson. We will discuss what exactly happened and how movement organizations can protect themselves in the future from attacks like these. But first, of course, these headlines. Last week, Donald Trump mustered his best pomp and circumstance to make speech about a supposed revelation regarding U.S. election integrity. The speech, which many news outlets just didn't cover live, was a recapitulation of a lot of lies about the 2020 election, which he continues to maintain that he won, of course. The bottom line of this speech was a demand that Congress pass the SAVE Act in hopes of purging voter rolls before November, which could easily backfire for any number of reasons. It's good that a lot of the major networks were hesitant to broadcast this. Unlike with previous presidents, you just don't know when he might drift into straight-up libel in the middle of a speech, making it difficult to air unedited as a television station. A lot of what he said in his speech was either straight-up false or an aggressive reframe of information we already had about the security of U.S. voter data. There are some things in Trump's comments, though, that bear some examination. In particular, the speech resurrects the boogeyman of Chinese election interference. For those of us paying attention to this narrative thread, there's been vanishing little of the kind of brinksmanship with China that we saw in Trump 1.0 this time around, aside from some skirmishes around the AI industry. Part of the reason for this is that it's been a losing proposition for the US. We actually get a lot less out of this kind of rivalry than the hawks want to admit. But in addition to signaling some of the avenues the administration is going to pursue to suppress and discredit the vote in the upcoming midterms, this speech also indicates a shift around the administration's rhetoric about China. Look, some of this is explicitly so they can start claiming that there's a serious national security threat regarding Chinese interference, which can be used as a pretext for more dramatic intervention, whether it's suspending vote by mail or requiring everyone to re-register to vote before the midterms, which are all things that have been previewed in draft measures to address this supposed threat for a while now. We have to pay attention to this framing of China as an explicit threat. This is not the first, nor it will be the last time that rivalry with China will be the pretext for authoritarian consolidation. Last week also saw the end of the ceasefire MOU in Trump's illegal war against Iran. In this latest wave of strikes, Iranian sources report that the U.S. bombed bridges, a train station, and an airport, sites which would likely qualify as civilian infrastructure and hence potential war crimes. While U.S. officials dispute these claims, the bombing of the bridge has been verified independently by the BBC. As of this morning, the Yemen-based Houthi militia instituted an additional blockade on the Bab al-Mandab Strait, the southern route for exports out of Saudi Arabia, which will surely not be good for global oil prices and supply chain logistics. The brief détente of ceasefire was always tenuous at best, and it feels worth reiterating that this is surely in the running for the most preventable economic and military disaster in the nation's history. Now, for some less talked about news, the Trump administration has ordered the arrest and requested the extradition of James Fergie Chambers, a wealthy American who's been funding humanitarian aid to Palestine and other progressive causes. Chambers was arrested in Spain 2 weeks ago on an international arrest warrant after the U.S. alleged that he had materially aided Hamas. Now, Spanish authorities have to decide whether to follow through on the extradition request from the Trump administration. While the indictment against Chambers is sealed, he has been scrutinized before for his giving. And news of his arrest also comes around the same time that Secretary of State Marco Rubio is trying to drum up international support for the administration's campaign against supposed left-wing extremism, convening a 60-country summit to take the project global.
Hey everybody, this is Maurice Mitchell, National Director of the Working Families Party. I read and give to Convergence because it has become a home for me to engage in critical analysis, find practical advice for organizing and strategy, and inspiration in the belief that a better world is not only possible, we can build it.
To make either a one-time donation or become a sustaining member, visit convergencemag.com/donate. You can find a direct link in the show notes. Thanks for listening.
On June 11th, staff members of the Ohio Organizing Collaborative watched as over 100 FBI agents entered and raided their offices, questioning workers and seizing computers and documents. Agents also reportedly fanned out to homes of volunteers, board members, and staff, fishing for information and electronic devices. The agents were said to have been investigating quote-unquote voter fraud allegations, but a month later, the agency has released no official statement or probable cause for these actions. The FBI raids follow similar attacks from the Trump administration, including seizing ballots and records in Fulton County in Georgia, Maricopa County in Arizona, and Wayne County in Michigan. All three of these are crucial presidential battleground states. The Ohio Organizing Collaborative works to boost voter rights and participation by helping Ohioans register to vote and defending minority groups in court against redistricting efforts, as well as other assaults on voter freedoms. So today I'm joined by a former staff member of the Ohio Organizing Collaborative and the current Senior Communications Director at Innovation Ohio, Caitlin Johnson, to talk about exactly what happened and how communities in Ohio are responding, as well as what other groups can do to protect themselves against other attacks in the future. Take a listen. Caitlin, thank you so much for making the time to chat today.
Oh, thanks for having me here.
Well, for starters, I'm sure many of our listeners have heard about the raid on the Ohio Organizing Collaborative, but could you talk a little bit about what happened on June 11th, what you know? I mean, especially stuff that might be of interest to other folks in movement that they should be aware of.
Yeah. Well, I just remember for myself, I woke up on June 12th, like I usually do, and I just had all these texts and chats about what happened to the OOC, I was shocked. Maybe shocked isn't the word, but upset. So what we know is that 100 federal agents came into Ohio. They went to the homes of staff, of leaders, of members, volunteers of the OOC. Were asking questions. In some cases, it was in front of the OOC folks as children. They went to one of OOC's offices. They took some equipment, and it just sent a chill throughout, the progressive world in Ohio, for sure.
And it's my understanding at this point, we're talking at the beginning of July, that the FBI hasn't really talked about what they were looking for or what the point is. Are there thoughts or speculations or conversations that you all have been having about, like, what this is ultimately about?
As somebody who's really more of like a friend of the OOC and not, intimately involved in all of those discussions, anything I say would really be speculation. But no, I haven't heard anything reported about what they exactly were looking for. There have been a few articles saying what it could be. I mean, what we know, we do know that there was talk about voter fraud, and we do know that the OOC is the largest voter registration program in the state of Ohio. I think one of the largest voter registration programs in the nation, and they focus on registering folks who are, usually have to surmount more hurdles to be able to vote. Black and brown folks, young folks, people with disabilities. That's been a big part of their work throughout the years.
Yeah, we put out a piece recently from Scott Nakagawa of the 22nd Century Initiative, really talking about the way that, in fact, a lot of the voter registration process has safeguards built in around false registration, and that, like, in a lot of ways, it feels like if this is what they're going after, they are in a lot of ways trying to punish the OOC for, in effect, complying with the law.
Yeah, I read that piece, and I thought it had so many good points because, I worked for the OOC. It's been a decade. which is crazy. But yeah, my last day of on the OOC at the OOC was election day 2016. But I was there for about 3.5 years, and voter registration wasn't really my main purview. I was doing a lot of environmental justice organizing when I was there, but I did have to know my way around it a little bit. And I did, register folks a few times. And I remember like learning that, even if you think there's something wrong with the voter registration form, like the person filled it out incorrectly, or you didn't think like you can't throw it out. Like we couldn't throw it out, and this is a long time ago, but that piece brought back memories about how like we had to flag it. Like if we thought something was wrong with these forms, we had to flag it. And that was part of what the OOC was doing with these last, as reported in your piece that you're talking about, that OOC was doing. And also just like the amount of registrations that they're doing. And there was a piece reported in, I think, Signal, Ohio, about how like up in Cuyahoga County, where I live, which is Cleveland, there's something like 18 voter registration cards were flagged, but they submitted 11,000. Like,
the proportion is just vanishingly small. Yeah,
exactly. Really, really small. And again, it's been a decade, but the systems we had in place back then were a lot. And I think it's only gotten more sophisticated since then.
And I guess you pointed at this a little bit, but I'm curious about the larger picture of the OOC's work and what you think the significance is of the FBI going after the OOC in particular. Yes, about sort of like the voter registration stuff, but also more generally about the kind of work that they're doing across the state.
Yeah, for me, I was there, like I said, 3.5 years, and I've been like served on the board. I've been a partner at other organizations I've worked for. Like I just like can't seem to quit the OOC, like because it's a really, really powerful and important group. So I'll give you an example. When I was working there, I spent a lot of time in Eastern Ohio, Appalachia region, the Ohio Valley, working on like, environmental justice issues. There's a hazardous waste incinerator there, there's fracking, coal, coal impoundment ponds, lots of stuff. And most of the folks that I was organizing were working class white folks or white folks who are living in poverty, right? But a lot of the rest of the OOC space is, in Columbus, in Cleveland, in Cincinnati, predominantly people of color, a lot of Black folks, and then there's a lot of student organizing as well. So I remember we had a week-long training. That's a big part of what the OOC does. They provide leaders who are organizing in their communities with like the skills to, run their campaigns, have a power analysis. And I had folks from East Liverpool, which is Columbiana County in the Ohio River Valley, interacting, sharing stories, like finding common ground with Black folks from Cleveland, right? And seeing how much they had in common, how similar their stories were, and how similar the issues on the ground in their communities are, and like starting to like build across those differences. This is again like 2014, 2015. Like that's really important in a state like Ohio. We do have, we have a lot of cities, like a lot of urban centers, but we have a lot of rural areas too. And a lot of times folks are pitted against each other based on, geography, based on race, but OOC is bringing people together across race, across place. And that is, very transgressive, right? That can be very transgressive. And so today, I believe they have organizing that's like focused on public schools in all sorts of communities, suburbs, cities, rural areas. They're organizing childcare workers. They have some faith-based organizing focused in Cincinnati, Ohio Student Association, at campuses all across the state. And the voter registration and civic engagement work is part of it, but they're also doing these like issue-based community organizing campaigns as well. So most recently, I've been involved a little bit more in like the public education space. And again, similar thing to what I saw with the work I did back in 10 years ago, a lot of parents from a lot of different walks of life all kind of coming together around the same thing. Like, we want proper funding for our kids' schools.
Yeah, I mean, it really sounds like, from what you're saying, that like a lot of the OSA's work is about building solidarity amongst the multiracial working class in a meaningful way, which, like, I don't know, I can see how that might be a threat to the powers that be. And I think that, like, you know, I grew up in the Midwest, I grew up in Michigan. So, you know, being very familiar with that kind of like Rust Belt, the politics of the Rust Belt, where you see like rural, like whiter, more rural folks being pitted against more melanated folks who live in cities, is like a tale as old as time in the sort of like divide and conquer playbook. So that resonates a lot with me as like there's important work there to be done, and that is a threat to the sort of systems of power that exist.
For sure. And, you know, even just within Ohio, the attempts to make it harder for people to vote, to dilute the power of votes, like that's been going on for years in our state. And OOC's civic engagement voter registration programs, that challenges that. All this work that I'm speaking of right now, you know, is nonprofit, 501c3, nonpartisan work.
Yeah.
So, but yet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the other thing that feels related to me is Ohio's deep history of being gerrymandered. We've been talking a lot internally here at Convergence about the ways in which Ohio is a very gerrymandered state, making this kind of raid a little bit, in some ways, surprising, but also like in other ways, it's like this context of the OOC bridging urban-rural divides and stuff like that maybe points to a clue as to like why Ohio in particular. Do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, all right, so right, like gerrymandering in Ohio is just off the charts. I mean, how many times did they, you know, by the Ohio Supreme Court, what year was this? 2022, 2023, you know, and refuse to do constitutional maps. I mean, it's a big problem in this state. And what I think we're kind of starting to witness, because it really, like, our legislature is so out of step with Ohioans. Like, we're starting to witness, like, yes, the gerrymander is incredibly powerful. Like, it has done a lot of damage, but like, it can't do it all because their policies are so unpopular. I mean, I can give you an example of in New Philadelphia, which is Tuscarawas County, which is about an hour and a half south of Cleveland, pretty small towns, like pretty rural area. People were like in a community meeting shouting at their state representative over unfair school funding and giving money to private schools for vouchers. Like, and in a community like that, rural communities especially, you don't have like the private school options that you have up here in Cleveland. So when you're sucking money out of their public schools, like you're really kind of leaving families hanging in a major way. So yeah, I mean, that's deep red, like Tuscarawas County, and the rage that people had about school funding. Like, again, it's just starting to like you can only gerrymander so much if your agenda is unpopular with everyone. You know, like you can only purge so many people off the voter rolls if your agenda is abhorrent to everyone. And that's kind of, I think we're starting to get to that point in Ohio and, you know, maybe the nation.
Yeah. Honestly, I mean, I feel like we're hearing a lot of stuff like this also from other states that have been gerrymandered to hell. And like, Florida is a great example, right? Where like people are just fed up with a lot of the things that the DeSantis administration is doing. Well, I guess like thinking about the impacts of the raid itself, how are folks connected to the OOC holding up and handling the situation? Whether that's the organization itself, the communities they organize in, your organization, or other organizations that work with the OOC. What's the atmosphere like dealing with the fallout from this?
Well, I mean, OOC, if you check out their website and their social media, you know, they put out an open letter, like defending themselves, you know, saying they're going to fight this. And I said to the people I know that work there, like, you guys are crazy. They just had week-long organizing training. Like, last week. Like they're still organizing, they're still like cultivating their leaders and like giving them skills. So like that's OOC, they're not backing down, which it's just always so funny to me because like all these institutions with all this money and all this power have capitulated like all over the place, like universities, hospitals, law firms, like whatever. And then you got some like scrappy nonprofits in Ohio that are like, no, we're going to fight you.
Yeah,
but,
you can't scare us.
but that's what's happening. And that's what I think like everybody is kind of feeling right now. That's why we created this hands-off like campaign, that's Hands Off Ohio. Like, nope, you're not going to keep us from voting. Like, we're going to keep doing the work. There are lots of organizations that are lining up behind that, and people are trying to figure out like what can we do to make sure that like the voter registration work keeps going. And I think everybody here is feeling pretty emboldened. Like, no, we're not going to let this stand. Like somebody has to hold the line. And I think that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, that tracks. I mean, it just sounds like there is a bench of leadership there that is like able to take this moment and really like move towards it as opposed to capitulate and move away from it, which is, I also think like, frankly, in a big way, it's like pace setting for people in other states too, that like seeing how you all are handling this and coming together around it as opposed to just like being quiet and sort of taking it lying down is like, it's important for other folks to see. And it's an important message to send to other people.
Well, I think people in our state, had Minnesota to look to, and the acts of bravery there from ordinary people who aren't like nonprofit advocate organizers for their jobs, but just did that because they didn't want to see their neighbors get taken. They wanted to protect their communities. There are lots of examples all over the country that we can look to. So, we're certainly not the first in Ohio, and we certainly won't be the last, but what do they say? They say courage is contagious, and so like somebody has to stand up. And like I said, I think it's funny that, it's just the regular folks, it's the nonprofit voter registration groups, it's like that are the ones that are showing us the way rather than all these big moneyed organizations and folks that really have like, a lot more power, institutional heft behind them. But hey, like hopefully the courage of the OOC and others will be contagious in that way too.
Yeah, hopefully so. Well, you mentioned a little bit Hands Off Ohio, but could you tell our listeners a little bit about the Hands Off Ohio project and what you all are working on to protect voters and their ability to make their voice heard this fall?
The Hands Off Ohio project kind of spun into action immediately after this all happened. And I think it's also because, there've been a lot of relationships and built over the years, and there are a lot of folks like myself in Ohio that have been working in this space and just like knew how to come together quickly to get something done. So, we have some messaging on the website for ways that people can talk about it. Like that's my job is communications. And so, we have some messaging there. We have some ways that people can contribute to like the civic engagement space in Ohio. Like if you want to provide financial resources, some links there. And then there have also been different like sign-on letters that we're putting out there into the world, like trying to get faith leaders to sign on, business leaders to make pledges to protect democracy. And then we've been standing up some rallies like in Cleveland at one of our churches. And we've also been, having some days where we actually like have folks registering and teaching people how to register folks to vote. But yeah, it's been all hands on deck, just trying to make sure like people know that this is not something we're going to accept. We're going to move forward, and we're not going to let, I think a lot of it is like a narrative war, and we're not going to let, the Trump administration, MAGA, write this narrative about what's happening in Ohio, because that's really what they're trying to do. They're trying to start to sow doubt make people worried about the election, starting to cast doubt. I feel like that's a lot. That's my personal belief, is that that's a lot of like trying to sow these seeds, just in case 2026 doesn't go the way that they would like.
Yeah, frankly, that's been a thing that I've been thinking about too, is that like this is part of a drumbeat that I'm sure we're going to see more and more happening in other states where elections are highly contested this fall. What has the reaction to Hands Off Ohio been like outside of the core base? Like, are there things that you're seeing in local media, in things that like local businesses are participating, stuff like that, that show that this is becoming kind of like productively polarizing, let's say, for folks in the community?
Yes, but trying to reach beyond the base is an important thing that we have to do. I can say, like, we had our first call, an emergency call, after this all started happening. And we had a Zoom, like we've learned now, we had a Zoom account for 300 people. Like 2,000 people were trying to get on that call. It was crazy. Like, it was crazy.
Yeah, it's amazing.
That's a really good problem. And we've had 2,000 people like sign on to the letter calling, saying that they support Ohio Organizing Collaborative, and they want, the MAGA regime to keep their hands off our vote and hands off Ohio. So like that has been a big thing. And I can say, just for me personally, I've had folks reach out to me and from different kind of like groups up here in the Cleveland area, asking me to come speak, like do kind of talk like I'm talking now, talk about the OOC and the work they do and, what it means. So I think it's definitely starting to get out there. Most regular Ohioans, I don't think, have a great grasp of like, the progressive nonprofit ecosystem, but I think they do understand the idea of trying to make it harder for people to vote and to try and to go after an organization that's like one of its major jobs has been to help people participate and have a say over what happens in our communities. Like, that is offensive to them. So yeah, I mean, that's what we're trying to do and spread the word about.
I guess the other thing that I would ask is, like, obviously it's still really early days yet, especially if there are sort of like legal cases that emerge, stuff like that. But is there advice based on what you've seen over these last several weeks, advice that you would give to organizations in other states thinking about how they may prepare their staff, their organization, protect their work and protect the voters that they're organizing and working with, as we can imagine that this kind of thing is going to heat up in the coming months?
Yeah, we have been able to hear some talks from like different security experts. And I think that is one thing that people really need to take seriously. All the passwords and the different devices that you can use to protect your work, to protect your devices. That's something I think we all probably need to improve our hygiene around. And I know personally that's been something I've been trying to do. I never worried about it as much before, but I'm worrying about it now. And I think we all need to take it seriously. I think also just, when something like this happens to another organization, or just like to speak up about it and call it out for what it is as loudly as we can, because like I said, like who knows who could be next. One thing I wanted to hit on, and it's not exactly related to electoral stuff, but I think it is like there's another narrative that has been going on in Ohio as well about Medicaid fraud. And so I mean, this fraud narrative is kind of like the overarching thing, right, that's happening. And a few weeks before this all happened, there was a piece of legislation that was meant to kind of end home health care through Medicaid for, people with disabilities, or if you had a loved one that was like, couldn't take care of themselves anymore. So they didn't have to go to nursing homes, right? And it was a Daily Wire report that started it, because the guy in the Daily Wire wrote, Somali immigrants are defrauding the system, right? We had Dr. Oz coming in here. We had like all sorts of Trump administration officials coming in here and saying like, Ohio, there were congressional hearings. And then at the state legislature, meanwhile, they were like ramming through this legislation as quick as possible. And I felt like, as I was watching as an observer, I was seeing a lot of people just like seed the fraud ground, which is just be like, oh, of course we don't want fraud. But that, like,
Yeah.
and it was like accepting the premise, right?
Yeah.
Like accepting the premise. And again, I don't know enough about Ohio's Medicaid programs to tell you whether or not I'm sure there's fraud in anything, right? But to the
there's fraud in
level,
the White House.
right? Yeah, right. Like,
who's defrauding whom? Like, let's
exactly. Like, but it was intentionally like targeting Somali immigrants, right? And it was like using it to justify gutting these social programs, and then like also like wrapping it into this anti-immigrant narrative. And so I just feel like this is like a through line that is going through, where you see this fraud being done by the other who, don't belong, and we need to get them out. And I just want to encourage anybody who is, involved in this work to just like not accept their premise so readily, because I feel like so many leaders do that, and they think they're like finding common ground, or they think they're, making sense, taking the moderate position, but they're really like accepting the premise and they're working in that other side's narrative. And I feel like in this case, for the most part, I've been pretty happy that a lot of leaders have not done that when it comes to this raid and this investigation on the OOC. But I think we have to kind of view it in all the ways that this idea of fraud is being weaponized against people.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of Minnesota, right? Like that has been successfully deployed against long-term politicians in progressive politicians in Minnesota. And like what we're seeing now is that like the person who started that was just some right-wing YouTuber who just like decided to show up and harass some daycare workers, which is like, first of all, wild. It's just like wild stuff. But the sort of like right-wing outrage machine will like glom onto something because they like to play. They're willing to play it fast and loose with the facts in that way. And I think that like, you're right. This does also harken back to an older playbook that even before this year or the past couple years is about like, during like school integration, the ways that the far right used fears around racial integration to then defund public schools in states like Virginia. That like, this is not, it's not a new playbook, but it's like the things that they're applying it to are new.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I remarked similar, like I was like, really, we're going to let this like crackpot from the Daily Wire, like upend like our entire like legislative session. Like that's kind of where we are now. Yeah. Because like they are doing it all for the optics. Like they're doing it all for like the narrative, all for the gram, whatever. Mm-hmm. Like, that's why they're doing it. And, I just think that like not taking the bait is really important. I feel like one of the things that's successful about what we're doing here is that we're not taking the bait,
Yeah. That's great. Is there anything else about kind of the work that Hands Off Ohio is doing right now that you want to share with our listeners that you think are other important lessons that people need to take?
To me, it's that not letting them bully us, standing up, not operating in their frame. Those are the two big things, like from a messaging and communications perspective. And then, I mean, to my amazement, like I said, OOC is continuing on and like they're going strong. They're doing their work. And I think a lot of our partners throughout the state understand, what's at stake here, which is why you've seen so many folks, making statements and speaking out. I think they understand what's at stake. So having those long-term relationships built where you can kind of deploy it. I mean, I've mentioned Minnesota before. A lot of folks in Ohio like have trained with and worked with folks in Minnesota for years. So looking to them as an inspiration for really like true solidarity, I think that's really important. And they've been great role models in that way.
If listeners want to help out, if they want to get involved in some way, if they want to learn more, where would you point them?
they should go to handsoffohio.org. And that's when you'll find message guidance. You'll find ways to contribute to, civic engagement ecosystem in Ohio. You'll find sign-ons, if that's appropriate for you, if you're a faith leader, if you're a business, or, you just want to show your support in general. I think that's where you'll be able to find all that stuff. And, like I said, this is understanding that this is part of a broader, it's not just like an OOC one-off, like picking on the OOC. It's, it's very intentional, and it's part of a long legacy of anti-democratic behavior in the state of Ohio. And so we're just not gonna let them stop us.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Caitlin. I know you all are up against a lot, and thank you so much for making the time, and thank you for your work.
Oh, thank you.
My thanks again to Caitlin Johnson for joining me today. This show is published by Convergence, a magazine for radical insights. I'm Caden Mock, and our producer is Josh Elstro. Kimmy David designed our cover art. Trey Nitza is our summer intern. Convergence Magazine is a proud founding member of the Movement Media Alliance. If you liked what you heard, please let us know. Be sure to subscribe for more episodes, tell a friend, and rate and review the show wherever you listen. It helps us find new audiences, and it means a lot to our team. And finally, if you would like to support the work that we do at Convergence, bringing our movements together to strategize, struggle, and win in this crucial historical moment, please join our 2026 member drive. Go to bit.ly/2026 member drive to set up your membership and get great perks too. I hope this helps.